Well, it's good to be with you again today as we continue to walk now through the second chief part of the Catechism. So, again, there are 6 chief parts: the commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, baptism, absolution, and the Lord's Supper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we are talking about the first article of the Apostles' Creed. And remember that there are 3 articles found which make it easy to understand and confess who our God is. 1, 2, and 3. And the work of each person of the Trinity. So the first article is about God the Father Almighty, who made heaven and earth. So this is about creation. Second is about Christ, redemption. And the third is about the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from the Father and the Son and sanctifies us and keeps us in the faith. So that's what the Creed, kind of how it's structured and how we're looking at it. So we're going to focus again on the first article here. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Last week we looked specifically at this portion of Luther's explanation, that I believe God has made me and all creatures, that he has given me my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all my members, my reason, and all my senses, and still takes care of them. So this week we're going to focus on this, and next week we're going to focus on the conclusion here of the first article. So that gives us 3 weeks to spend considering and pondering God who created. So as God has given me my body and soul, he gives me things to tend to this body and soul. He gives me clothing and shoes, food and drink, house and home, wife and children, land, animals, and all I have. He richly and daily provides me with all that I need to support this body and life, and he defends me from against all danger, and guards and protects me from all evil. So this is what we confess about God the Father. So Luther has a couple things to say about this before we get into our text today. So I want to talk about this in the Large Catechism. Besides, he causes all created things to serve for the uses and necessities of life. So he gives me food and drink, clothing, support, wife and children, domestic servants, house and home, and more. And he created all these things to serve the necessities of life. These include the sun, the moon, and the stars in the heavens, day and night, air, fire, water, earth, and whatever it bears and produces. So he gives us the land to support our bodies with. They include birds and fish, beasts, grain, and all kinds of produce. Oh, the produce. I could really go for some peaches right now. They also include whatever else there is for the bodily and temporal goods, like the government, peace, and security. So this is pretty neat. All these things God has created and given and ordered for the sake of the care of the body and the soul. So we learn from this article that none of us owns for himself, nor can preserve his life, nor anything that is here listed or can be listed. This is true no matter how small and unimportant a thing might be, for all is included in the word creator. So this is an interesting thing here that he says as well. This means that you do not own your own body, but your body is actually used by God to tend to the needs of others as well, just as he uses your neighbor to take care of you, and all the earth and the grains and the bread and the wine and the birds and the fish and all the animals that are all over the sun, the moon, the stars. All these things are given for you and for all creatures by the providence and goodness of God. Further, we also confess that God the Father has not only given us all that we have and see before our eyes, but he daily preserves and defends us against all evil and misfortune. He directs all sorts of danger and disaster away from us. We confess that he does all this out of pure love and goodness, without any merit, as a kind father who cares for us so that no evil falls upon us. But to speak more about this belongs in the other 2 parts of the article, where we say Father Almighty. So there's something to think about here as he's talking about this. He defends me against all danger and guards and protects me from all evil. I don't know about you, but I've had a few instances where I was like, man, I was pretty sure I was going to get hit by a car or something. I probably should have died, but just missed barely. One time I was walking along when I was working as a staff member at Camp Arcadia in northern Michigan, and there was a little toddler sitting on the stool. She was on that little stool by where you get the ice cream at, and she was having a lot of fun, and she was adorable. And I was like, that looks bad. Something looks like she's going to fall. And sure enough, with her little toddler self, she toppled backwards. But I saw her, and I ran across while she was falling, and I caught her head before it hit the ground. She got bumped a little bit, but she did not smash her head directly on to the ground. And I pulled a muscle or something, and I was stretched out like this. Oh gosh, trying to catch her. So there's my little drawing of me saving her. So in this way, God used me to protect this child. And I've had the same thing happen for me as well, as people have tended to me. Sometimes that comes in the form of discipline. Hey, you are doing something foolish and you need to stop doing that. So I heard that a lot from my parents, but also some friends as I was doing stuff, for being unreasonable or angry for no good reason. And so God tends to people in that way as well. One time I almost got in a car accident, but barely missed a semi. So there's all these ways that God tends to us. So he defends me against all danger and guards and protects me from all evil. And I had this other idea too. One day when I was thinking about graduating from the seminary and becoming a pastor, that God protects us as we are training to be ministers of the word, to preach and to administer the sacrament. And how easy would it be for the devil, as we are walking out of the chapel after we are called to our churches, if the church or the temple or the chapel just collapsed on us and killed all of us. Done. That would have taken care of all these men who are about to go out and preach the word. And yet this does not happen. We don't all go out and then get hit by cars immediately. So there is some protection here, because we are, in this regard, the enemy. So are all Christians of the devil and what he desires. We are the enemy of sin. We are the enemy of death, because we preach and believe against these things. And yet God keeps us from these. Now then we have another problem, though. He protects me from all evil, and yet here we are in the middle of a pandemic. What is going on? How can this be good when there are people who are getting sick, when there are people who are dying? We just did a couple funerals recently. One for a woman with COVID. I've done a couple for people who have had COVID. And their families are crushed and sad, and the world cannot, they can't gather as well. So there's a problem with the actual gathering, because we are afraid of spreading the disease and making it worse, which makes it hard to have a funeral when all the family cannot attend. So how is this good? Or how is he protecting me from all danger and all evil? Well, let's look at our reading today, and we'll see if there's anything in here that might be worth talking about. So this is from 1 Kings 17. This is a lovely story that I'll address specifically God providing in these ways, and God preserving and protecting from evil. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah. That's who this is. And he says, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you." All right, so there's a couple things going on that we have to know. First of all, just before this reading, Elijah prophesied that there would be a drought and famine. So there's going to be a lack of food in this area, and people are going to be starving. And when people starve, they get desperate, and then they get angry, and then they fight, and then they steal. And all kinds of things go wrong when there is drought, when there's no rain to grow crops, when there's famine and there's no food because of the drought, with no rain to not grow crops. So there's a problem here, and Israel is being judged because of this. So Elijah is told to go to Zarephath, which is actually a region of Gentiles. And God tells him that there is a widow there who will feed you. So let's learn about this widow, because there's one thing to understand about a widow is that's a little different than now. Nowadays, if a woman or a husband loses their spouse, well, specifically a woman, If a woman loses her husband and she is made a widow, she can still live. She can still go to the store. She still owns property. She still could have a job potentially, unless she's retired or something. But even then, she could get a job if she wished. But back then, a woman who did not have a husband had no support or safety structure to take care of her. It was a different culture. So there's a reason why God says, instructs the Israelites that when they are collecting grain in the field, that they leave whatever they drop on the ground so that the widows and the women can come gather them up, because that was actually their welfare system. They were able to feed and take care of the most vulnerable in their community by leaving the food for them, and then they would take it and they would bake it and they would share it. And so people were taken care of, which was really neat. But to be a widow then means you have no standing, no money necessarily, or very little. Couldn't own property, no property. And so he's going to say, this woman's going to feed you in the middle of a famine. What is he talking about? So Elijah arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was gathering sticks. And he called her and he said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. Give me something to drink. Give me something to eat. And she said, As Yahweh your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks, that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. There is no hope here for her. She is despairing. She is going to prepare her last meal for her and her son, because after this little handful of flour is gone, they have nothing else to do but starve to death. What a situation to be in. And then to have this guy show up, this prophet, which she might have known who he was. So that's something. As the Lord your God lives. So that's something interesting. Not my God. I have nothing baked. But he shows up and he says, Give me something to drink. Give me something to eat. And she says, I don't have anything. I'm going to prepare this so that we can die. Now, this woman of Zarephath is a Gentile. And that's something important to know as well. We'll hold on to that for a minute. Elijah said to her, Do not fear. Go and do as you have said. First, make me a little cake of it. Bring it to me. And afterward, make something for yourself and your son. Which sounds so insensitive here. You'll be fine. Why don't you make me something first, and then something for yourself and your son? But we need to remember, too, that what we're seeing here is a prophecy in itself of type and shadow, of shadow and substance. Something is happening here that is pointing us not to the event at hand, but to something greater that will be fulfillment of this event, which is kind of neat. All right? So that's what's going on here. There is prophecy being carried out in the lives of Elijah and this widow and her son. For thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that Yahweh sends rain upon the earth. What a promise to be made in the midst of a famine. During this famine, you will have flour and you will have oil to bake with. And it will never run out, even in the midst of this famine. In this way, God certainly does care for the body and soul of this woman. Because not only, so this is the interesting thing, he's going to feed her with food, but also, in her despair, she hears, Do not be afraid, which gives her faith, which tends to her soul. So you can see these things wrapped up here in this. And she went and did as Elijah said. And she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of Yahweh that he spoke by his prophet Elijah. What a thing to do. Now this is something interesting. Just a note, just as a side note, on this. This phrase, do not be afraid, it's amazing how many times in Scripture this shows up. Do not be afraid. I have them written down, and I imagine there's more as well. But we see this phrase in Genesis 15 and Genesis 50, in Deuteronomy 1, in Joshua 8, here in 1 Kings 17 with the widow of Zarephath, 2 Kings chapter 6, 2 Kings chapter 19, Isaiah chapter 7, Jeremiah 1 and 42, in chapter 3 of Ruth, in Nehemiah 4. In Matthew, it shows up multiple times, especially in 1, 14, and 28. In Luke and Acts, which is basically Luke part 2, because Luke wrote Acts as well, it shows up 1, 2, 3 times in chapter 1, 2, and Acts chapter 18. It shows up again in Revelation 2, but I think it also shows up elsewhere in Revelation. This phrase is repeated again and again and again, and this is good news. Do not be afraid, says our God to us. Do not be afraid, says Elijah, the man of God, to the woman in Zarephath. God created you and will tend to your body and make sure that you have food. And again, here in this text, we have something bigger going on, because this is pointing to something about Jesus, really. We have here a little picture not only of her being fed, but maybe the feeding of the 5,000, where food is produced by God, which is also type and shadow found in when God provides for food in the wilderness to Israel. That points to the feeding of the 5,000 that Jesus does, and how this abundance of food, where there will be no more starving, where there will be no more famine, we look forward to this in the resurrection, in the new heavens and the new earth. So all this is pointing directly to the day of the Lord, when Christ returns in glory. So do not be afraid, he says. So then we go on with our story. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. Hey, wait a minute. He just said, don't be afraid. And you've been saying, Pastor Jones, that God will protect us from all evil and danger. What's going on here? Now he's sick. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him, which means he died. Oh boy. Now what do we do? How do we understand this? And she said to Elijah, what have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my son to remembrance and to cause the death of bring my sin to remembrance and cause the death of my son. She's angry. Probably with good reason, I would say. You know, he came and said, don't be afraid, you'll take care of us. And yet here is her son, dead in the midst of this famine. But wait, there's more. He said to her, give me your son. And he took him from her arms, and he carried him up to the upper chamber where he lodged, and he laid him on his own bed. And he cried to Yahweh, O Yahweh, my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son? So even Elijah is asking God, why are you doing this? This woman has been through enough, and you promised her life. Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times. Oh, there's an important number. And he cried to the Lord, O Yahweh, my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. And the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, see, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of Yahweh is in your mouth. That is in your mouth is truth. What a story here now we have. Now there's one thing, this is kind of a neat thing maybe just to look at, is the structure of this passage, first of all. It is called a chiasm. Let me explain what I mean. A chiasm is a form of Hebrew literature, or a way that the Hebrew authors used to write. This happens in poetry still, and in narratives. But basically, it starts with one thing, has a second thing, 2a. Then there's something in the middle. Then there's something that mirrors that second line. And then there's something that mirrors the third line. And often the most important thing here is in the middle. So it's kind of like a sandwich. Bread, cheese, meat in the middle. Right, so we actually see this in this text. So I have this, hopefully we can read it. Look at that. There it is. In this little footnote in my commentary on 1 Kings. You can see this. So we have the speech by the widow where she yells at him, "O man of God." And then a speech by Elijah, "Give me your son." Or not a speech, but there's speaking going on. Elijah takes the boy from his mother. He brings the boy up to his own room. He puts the boy on the bed. Elijah raises the child. There it is. Resurrection right in the middle. Elijah picks up the child, just as he did here, placed the boy on his bed, and then he picks him up. Elijah brings him down from his room. There it is. Elijah returns the boy to his mother before he had taken the boy from his mother. Elijah speaks, just like he did here, and this woman speaks. So you have this really interesting thing going on where it's kind of like a pyramid heading towards the most important thing, which is the raising of this child. Now, there's a couple things to note here that are really, really fascinating. This, like I said, is type and shadow of something good that is coming, of the attendance of God to the bodies and souls of his people. First of all, this woman is a Gentile. One of the first of many Gentiles who will hear the word of God and believe. Because you and I likely are Gentiles, and we have heard this and believed. So God is bringing all nations and blessing them through Israel, just as he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what we have here then, too, is a revealing of sin, punishment for sin. Although, wait a second, that's still not exactly right. Like, was it this woman's fault? Well, not exactly. This is just something bad that happened, but this is how she's reading it. He says, "Give me your son," and he's dead. And you can see this too. He took him from her arms and he carried him up. Carries him up. So here he is. There's Elijah, and he's carrying the dead boy. And they go up the stairs, or up into the upper room. Here, he is made alive. And then he brings him down. And he gives him back to his mother. We almost see a kind of a little picture here of us residing in heaven with Christ until we are returned from the dead. This is a picture of the resurrection of all flesh and the time in between while we all wait in heaven and on earth for Christ to return in glory for the hope of the resurrection. The day when death is undone, when all sad things become untrue. What a beautiful picture this is. And then to strengthen this too, he stretches himself upon the child. So he's laying on, this is kind of maybe weird, but I don't know why he did this, but here he did. He stretched himself upon the child. That looks a lot like atonement. And atonement means covering over. So when you are atoned for by Christ, you are covered over by Christ. Just as this dead boy is covered by Elijah. So this points directly to this atonement as well. And then 3 times, well, how many days was Jesus in the tomb? 3 days in the tomb. There's the tomb. And he cried to the Lord, just like all the mourning and weeping, and us still now, even now, crying to the Lord at this Advent season, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." I have prayed this prayer myself multiple times for my own children. So what is it? So here's the thing too then. Just mentioned my own children that I've lost, our 3 sons. How can we say that God protects us from danger and evil if this is true? Well, again, we have here more than just the immediate. Things are going on that are difficult and rough. And yet, hey buddy, are difficult and rough. And yet this is not the end of all things. The scope of things is very much bigger. We have the resurrection to look forward to. Right now. The resurrection's over here. And this promise that nothing will harm us or hurt us ever again, this will be seen fully on the last day. But even now, God does tend to the needs of our bodies and souls, feeding us, clothing us, and preaching the gospel of Christ into our ears. Oh, careful, buddy. Sorry, Elliot just came in while I was filming my video here. So he's here. Can you be quiet for 1 second? I'm almost done.
He just did it.
Shh, shh, shh. Good job spinning that top. He's spinning a top. We'll spin the top before I wrap up today. So this is looking forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Elliot, please don't use the phone right now. Thank you. And that's it. There's some thoughts for you about this. Now that the end is falling apart a little bit because my family just showed up for church, and Mr. Arnie is here as well. But here's the top. Look, Melissa gave me a top for my birthday. There it is. It's a really nice top. It's made out of aluminum. And here it goes. Titanium, I'm sorry. I said aluminum. There goes the top. So that is all we have for today. Go in peace and serve the Lord this Advent season.